Every parent lives with the fear of losing their child in a split second. At Millfield's public pool, that fear became reality when 4-year-old Bobby Jennings slipped beneath the water unnoticed. His mother was talking with friends nearby. The lifeguard was helping another child. Nobody saw Bobby drowning except the woman in blue robes who stepped into the pool from nowhere. She lifted him gently, and he breathed again. 30 security cameras captured the miracle from every angle, but they couldn't explain how the Virgin Mary appeared or where she went. Those who witnessed it said the water glowed around her and time seemed to stop. When Bobby's grandmother saw the footage, she immediately recognized the face from her old prayer card. The same gentle eyes, the same sorrowful expression of love. But can a modern world accept what 30 cameras clearly recorded? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dorothy Castellano had seen enough suffering in 37 years of nursing to question everything she'd once believed about divine intervention. At 72, she carried the weight of every patient she couldn't save. Every prayer that seemed to echo back unanswered from hospital ceilings. The worn prayer card of the Virgin Mary tucked deep in her wallet had become more habit than hope, a relic from her mother's unwavering faith that Dorothy could neither embrace nor entirely abandon. Millfield wasn't the kind of place where miracles happened. This southeastern Pennsylvania town of 18,000 souls had weathered the closure of the steel mill, the exodus of young families seeking opportunities elsewhere, and the slow erosion of the downtown that once bustled with commerce. What remained was a community of survivors, retirees on fixed incomes, young families making do with service jobs, and immigrants like her own Italian grandparents who'd planted roots too deep to abandon. The public pool on Maple Street served as one of the few gathering places where economic differences dissolved in chlorinated water. Built in 1962 with federal funds, it had aged gracefully under the care of successive generations of lifeguards and maintenance crews. Its kidney-shaped design and vintage diving board spoke of an era when public works were built to last, when communities invested in shared spaces for the simple pleasure of bringing people together. Dorothy's daughter, Jessica, had married young and worked double shifts at the hospital, while her husband David managed inventory at the distribution center 20 miles away. Their 3 children, Bobby, 6-year-old Katie, and 10-year-old Marcus, were Dorothy's joy and purpose in retirement. She'd volunteered to watch them during summer break, grateful for the excuse to spend long afternoons at the pool where she could read her paperback novels while keeping one eye on their splashing games. Bobby, the youngest, possessed that fearless curiosity that made grandmothers both proud and perpetually anxious. His sandy hair bleached lighter each summer, his arms and legs gaining the confidence that came from countless hours in the water. He'd learned to swim the previous summer, though Dorothy insisted on staying within arm's reach whenever he ventured. Beyond the shallow end, the afternoon of July 15th started like any other. Dorothy had packed sandwiches and juice boxes, loaded the children into her aging Honda Civic, and driven the familiar route to the pool. The parking lot was moderately busy for a Tuesday. Mothers with toddlers claiming the baby pool, teenagers clustered around the diving board, and the usual collection of retirees seeking refuge from the heat in aluminum lawn chairs. Marcus immediately joined a pickup basketball game on the adjacent court, while Katie found her summer friends near the snack bar. Bobby, as always, gravitated toward the water with single-minded determination. Dorothy settled into her chair with her current read, a mystery novel set in a small town, not unlike Millfield, and began the delicate balance of relaxation and vigilance that defined her summer afternoons. The lifeguard on duty was Jennifer Banks, a local college student who'd worked the pool for 3 summers. Dorothy had watched her grow into the role, learning to read the subtle signs of trouble that separated confident swimmers from those in distress. Jennifer maintained the professional awareness that came with genuine care for the job, scanning the water methodically every few seconds, while managing the usual pool politics of where teenagers could and couldn't congregate. Around 3:30, Dorothy's attention was captured by conversation with Maria Santos, another grandmother whose grandson played with Bobby. They discussed the upcoming parish festival, the rising cost of groceries, and Maria's concerns about her daughter's divorce proceedings. These were the comfortable rhythms of community life, shared worries and celebrations that bound neighbors together across generations. The pool maintenance records would later show that all safety equipment had passed inspection the previous month. The water chemistry was properly balanced, the emergency phones functional, and the security camera system that had been installed 2 years earlier was recording without interruption. 36 cameras captured every angle of the pool area, a precaution installed after a liability lawsuit had threatened the facility's insurance coverage. Bobby had been playing in the 3-foot section near the ladder, well within Dorothy's peripheral vision. He'd mastered the art of holding his breath underwater, a skill that both impressed and worried the adults who watched him. The water was clear, the afternoon sun casting dancing patterns on the pool bottom that mesmerized children and adults. Alike, what happened next would be analyzed frame by frame, scrutinized by experts in video forensics, and debated by theologians and skeptics alike. But in that moment, Dorothy was simply enjoying the ordinary pleasure of watching her grandson play while discussing life's everyday concerns with a friend. The prayer card in her wallet, a picture of the Virgin Mary her mother had given her, before leaving for nursing school in 1968, had traveled with Dorothy through decades of night shifts, difficult diagnoses, and the quiet moments when she desperately wanted to believe that someone was listening to her whispered pleas for her. Patience healing. The card's edges were soft with wear, the image faded but still recognizable. A young woman with dark hair and blue robes, eyes filled with infinite compassion and sorrow. Dorothy had carried it through her own children's illnesses, her husband's, death from cancer, and the countless times when medical science reached its limits and families turned to whatever faith they could summon. She'd never quite decided whether the card was a symbol of hope or a reminder of prayers that seemed to go unanswered. The afternoon was winding down, families beginning to pack their belongings and corral tired children for the drive home. Jennifer was reminding swimmers that the pool would close in an hour, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who'd made the same announcement countless times. Dorothy glanced at Bobby, noting with maternal satisfaction that he was still playing safely in the shallow water. She turned back to Maria, who was expressing her gratitude for the parish priest's counseling during her daughter's difficult time. These were the conversations that mattered, the sharing of burdens that made community more than just geography. In 30 minutes, everything Dorothy thought she knew about faith, miracles, and the nature of divine intervention would be forever changed. The prayer card in her wallet would transform from a sentimental keepsake into evidence of something that defied every rational explanation she'd spent her adult life constructing. But for now, it was simply another summer afternoon at the pool, filled with the ordinary grace of children's laughter and the comfortable presence of neighbors who'd become family through the simple act of caring for each other's children. The moment came without warning, as emergencies always do. Dorothy was mid-sentence, discussing Maria's grandson's success in Little League, when her peripheral vision registered something wrong. Bobby had been playing near the pool steps just moments before, but the space where he'd been splashing was empty. Her heart stopped before her mind processed what she was seeing. The surface of the water showed no disturbance, no indication that a child had slipped beneath. The other swimmers continued their activities, unaware that 4-year-old Bobby Jennings was drowning in plain sight. Jennifer's whistle, the bright silver whistle that hung around her neck like a talisman of authority and safety, remained silent. She was helping an elderly man navigate the pool ladder on the far side, her attention focused on preventing a different kind of accident. The whistle that was supposed to alert everyone to danger never sounded, because no one saw Bobby go under. No one except the woman who materialized at the pool's edge, as if stepping through an invisible doorway. Dorothy's scream caught in her throat as she watched the figure move with impossible grace into the water. The woman wore flowing robes of deep blue that should have billowed and dragged in the chlorinated water, but instead seemed to float around her like liquid light. Her face was young but carried an ancient sadness, the kind of sorrow that comes from watching humanity's pain across centuries. Time stretched like taffy. Dorothy later swore that she watched the rescue unfold in slow motion, each movement deliberate and tender. The woman reached down through 3 feet of water and lifted Bobby as easily as picking up a flower. His small body hung limp for a terrifying instant before she cradled him against her chest, one hand supporting his head with infinite gentleness. The water around them began to glow, not with reflected sunlight, but with something that seemed to emanate from the woman herself. Other witnesses would struggle to describe it later, reaching for words like phosphorescent or luminous, but falling short of capturing the quality of light that was both ethereal and unmistakably real. Bobby coughed once, a harsh sound that cut through the strange silence that had fallen over the pool area. Water streamed from his mouth and nose as his chest began to rise and fall with normal breathing. His eyes fluttered open, focusing immediately on the face above him with an expression of recognition that sent chills through every witness. "Pretty lady," he whispered, his voice carrying clearly across water that had become mirror still. The woman smiled, an expression of pure love and bottomless compassion that Dorothy felt pierce her heart like a sword of light. For one impossible moment, their eyes met across 30 feet of space, and Dorothy saw in that face the answer to every prayer she'd ever whispered in hospital corridors, every desperate plea she'd made for strength to comfort the suffering. It was the face from the prayer card, exactly as her mother had described it 60 years ago, when she'd given Dorothy the worn, holy image before leaving for nursing school. The same eyes that had gazed down from countless churches, the same gentle expression that had offered hope to generations of the faithful. Then, between one heartbeat and the next, she was gone. Bobby found himself standing in waist-deep water, near the pool ladder, completely alert and showing no signs of distress. The other swimmers began to notice the commotion as Dorothy ran toward the pool, her book forgotten, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Bobby!" She reached him just as Jennifer arrived, having finally registered that something was happening. "Are you okay? What happened?" The little boy looked around with the confusion of someone waking from a vivid dream. "The pretty lady helped me," he said matter-of-factly. "She said not to be scared." Jennifer immediately went into emergency protocol, helping Bobby from the water and checking for signs of distress. His breathing was normal, his color good, his responses appropriate. There was no indication that he'd been underwater long enough to suffer oxygen deprivation. "I need to call this in," Jennifer said, reaching for the emergency phone. Pool regulations required reporting any incident involving potential drowning, regardless of outcome. Other witnesses began gathering, their voices creating a buzz of confusion and amazement. Mrs. Henderson, who'd been reading in the shade, swore she'd seen a woman in blue walking on the water. The teenage lifeguards from the neighboring facility came running when they heard the commotion, finding Bobby perfectly fine, but everyone else clearly shaken. Dorothy knelt beside her grandson, examining him with the practiced eye of a career nurse. No blue lips, no coughing fits, no signs of water in his lungs. It was as if he'd never been in danger at all. "Tell me what happened," she said gently, taking his small hands in hers. "I went under the water to look for pennies," Bobby explained with 4-year-old logic. "But then I couldn't get back up. The pretty lady came and helped me. She was really nice." "What did she look like?" "Like in your book," he said, pointing toward Dorothy's abandoned novel. "Like the lady in the pictures at church." Dorothy felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Bobby had never shown particular interest in religious imagery, and she rarely took him to Mass. How could he possibly know what the Virgin Mary was supposed to look like? The pool manager arrived within minutes, followed by paramedics who examined. Bobby thoroughly, despite his protests, that he felt fine. The emergency medical technicians found no indication of water aspiration, no signs of distress, nothing to suggest he'd been in any danger. "We should check the security footage," the pool manager suggested, leading the group to the small office where the camera monitors displayed feeds from around the facility. The footage was crystal clear. 36 cameras had captured the incident. From every conceivable angle, recording in high definition what would become the most scrutinized piece of video in Millfield's history. On screen, they watched Bobby slip beneath the surface of the water. They saw him struggle briefly before going still. Then, impossibly, they watched a woman in blue robes step into frame from nowhere, lift him gently and hold him until he was breathing again. The cameras recorded her presence for exactly 47 seconds, but they offered no explanation for how she'd arrived or where she'd gone. One frame showed empty pool deck, the next showed her stepping into the water. Then she was gone again, as if she'd never existed, except for Bobby, standing in the shallow end, completely unharmed. Dorothy stared at the monitor, her hand unconsciously moving to the wallet in her purse, where the prayer card waited. The face on the security footage was identical to the image she'd carried for decades, down to the expression of loving sorrow that had comforted her through her darkest moments. The woman who'd saved Bobby was unmistakably the Virgin Mary. In a world of smartphones and surveillance cameras, of scientific skepticism and rational explanations, something impossible had just been recorded for posterity. The question wasn't whether it had happened. 36 cameras provided irrefutable evidence. The question was what Millfield would do with a miracle it couldn't explain away. By evening, the first newspaper clipping had already appeared online. The Millfield Gazette's website, usually updated weekly with little more than town council minutes and high school sports scores, crashed within hours of posting the headline, "Miracle at Municipal Pool. Security cameras record unexplained rescue." Jessica Jennings stared at her phone in the hospital waiting room, watching her family's private trauma become public spectacle. The emergency room doctors had insisted on keeping Bobby overnight for observation, despite his apparent perfect health. Standard protocol, they explained, though everyone could see the uncertainty in their eyes as they tried to reconcile his condition with the circumstances of his rescue. "This is insane," David muttered, scrolling through the comments section where neighbors debated whether they'd witnessed divine intervention or elaborate hoax. "People are calling us liars. Others are saying we staged this for attention." Dorothy sat in the corner chair, her hands folded in her lap, the prayer card now resting openly on the small table beside her. She'd stopped trying to hide it after. The third person asked if she'd recognized the woman in the security footage. The worn image seemed to pulse with new significance, no longer a relic of her mother's faith, but evidence of something that defied every rational framework she'd constructed. Father Antonio Delacroix arrived just after 8 o'clock, his presence bringing both comfort and complications. The parish priest was a thoughtful man in his 50s, trained in both theology and psychology, careful to distinguish between genuine spiritual experiences and the fervent imagination of believers seeking signs. He'd counseled families through claimed miracles before, gently guiding them toward more earthly explanations while never dismissing their spiritual needs. But the security footage left him speechless. "I've seen the video," he told Dorothy quietly. "I've watched it a dozen times. I've consulted with colleagues who specialize in these matters." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I cannot offer you a rational explanation for what those cameras recorded." Outside, the first van from Channel 8 News pulled into the hospital parking lot. Word had spread beyond Millfield's borders, carried by social media posts that multiplied. exponentially as the story reached believers and skeptics across the region. The hashtag #Millfield Miracle was trending in 3 states. Dorothy's phone buzzed constantly with calls from relatives she hadn't spoken to in years, friends from her nursing days, and reporters seeking exclusive interviews. She'd stopped answering after the 5th journalist asked if she planned to profit from her grandson's experience. "Mom," Jessica said gently, "we need to talk about this, about what happens next." "What happens next?" Dorothy replied, her voice steady despite her exhaustion, "is that people decide whether they can accept what they saw or if they need to explain it away." The pool manager had closed the facility indefinitely, overwhelmed by the crowd that gathered throughout the afternoon. Some came seeking healing, others driven by curiosity, and a few carrying signs denouncing what they called religious hysteria and exploitation of children. Dr. Margaret Foster, Bobby's pediatrician for his entire life, had examined the boy 3 times since his arrival at the hospital. Each examination yielded the same impossible results. No water in his lungs, no signs of oxygen deprivation, no trauma indicators whatsoever. His vital signs were perfect, his reflexes normal, his cognitive function unimpaired. "In 30 years of practice," she confided to Dorothy, "I've never seen anything like this. Children who've experienced near drowning show specific symptoms. Bobby shows none of them. It's as if he was never in danger at all." The newspaper clipping that would eventually frame Dorothy's kitchen wall bore the byline of Janet Morrison, a veteran reporter who'd covered everything from town festivals to factory closures. She'd approached the story with professional skepticism, interviewing witnesses, consulting experts, and examining the video evidence with the critical eye of someone who'd seen too many supposed miracles collapse under scrutiny. Her article concluded with a sentence that would be quoted for months. "Whatever happened at Millfield's municipal pool on July 15th defies conventional explanation, leaving this community to grapple with the possibility that some events transcend the boundaries of ordinary experience." Bobby slept peacefully in his hospital bed, unaware that his rescue had become a phenomenon extending far beyond his family's understanding. He'd drawn pictures throughout the evening, crayon sketches of a lady in blue who stood beside a pool, her arms outstretched in welcome. The hospital staff had quietly made copies before adding them to his medical file. Dr. Patricia Walsh, the hospital's chief of staff, called an impromptu meeting of senior medical personnel to discuss the case. The gathering in Conference Room B resembled less a medical consultation than a philosophical debate about the limits of scientific understanding. "We have a child who was clinically drowning," Dr. Walsh began, "rescued by means we cannot explain, showing no physical evidence of his ordeal. Our obligation is to his health and safety, not to solve theological mysteries." But even the most scientifically minded staff members struggled to dismiss what the cameras had recorded. The footage was being analyzed by video forensics experts, frame by frame, seeking evidence of digital manipulation or optical illusion. Preliminary reports found nothing suspicious, no evidence of editing, no signs of technological trickery. Dorothy's eldest daughter, Carol, drove down from Philadelphia after seeing the story on the evening news. She found her mother in the hospital cafeteria at 11 o'clock, surrounded by empty coffee cups and crumpled tissues. "Mom, are you sure about this?" Carol asked gently. "I mean, are you sure you saw what you think you saw?" Dorothy pulled the prayer card from her wallet, placing it on the formica table between them. "I've carried this for 54 years, she said. "Your grandmother gave it to me when I left for nursing school. She told me that Mary watches over those who care for others. But, Mom, I've seen this face in my prayers during every difficult night shift, every time I lost a patient, every moment when I wondered if faith meant anything at all." Dorothy's voice grew stronger. "Today, I saw her save my grandson's life." Carol studied the worn holy card, then looked at her mother's face, lined with age but radiant with something she hadn't seen there in years. It was the expression of someone who'd rediscovered hope after decades of doubt. The hospital's waiting room gradually emptied as visiting hours ended, but the vigil outside continued. Supporters had organized a prayer circle in the parking lot, their voices carrying hymns through the summer night. Counter-protesters maintained their own presence across the street, their signs declaring rational thinking and no religious exploitation. Dorothy remained at Bobby's bedside, watching him sleep and wondering how a 4-year-old's rescue had become a battleground for faith and skepticism. Tomorrow would bring more interviews, more analysis, more demands for explanations she couldn't provide. But tonight, she simply held her grandson's hand and whispered the prayers her mother had taught her, grateful beyond words that those prayers had finally been answered in a way that left no room for doubt. Bobby's medical records told an impossible story. Dr. Foster had documented every detail of his condition upon arrival at the hospital, creating a medical artifact that would challenge conventional understanding for years to come. No signs of hypoxia, no water aspiration, no neurological deficits, nothing to indicate he'd experienced even momentary oxygen deprivation. "This is medically unprecedented," she explained to a room full of specialists who'd reviewed the case files. "Children who've been underwater long enough to lose consciousness show specific physiological markers. Bobby shows none of them." The video analysis team from the State Crime Lab had spent 72 hours examining the security footage. Their equipment could detect digital manipulation down to individual pixels, identify camera angles and lighting inconsistencies, and expose even the most sophisticated special effects. Their preliminary report contained a single troubling conclusion. The footage showed no evidence of tampering. "We've enhanced every frame," lead technician Robert Kim explained to the town council emergency session. "We've analyzed shadows, lighting, water displacement patterns. Either this is the most sophisticated digital manipulation ever created, or something happened at your pool that we cannot explain scientifically." Mayor Davidson rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of unwanted national attention. CNN had called that morning, so had Fox News, The Today Show, and something called Ancient Mysteries. The town's website had crashed from traffic volume, and the phone system was overwhelmed with calls from journalists, pilgrimage groups, and skeptical organizations demanding investigations. "What do we do with something like this?" he asked the assembled council members. "How do we manage what's happening to our community?" Dorothy had taken Bobby home after his overnight observation, but home no longer felt like a sanctuary. News vans lined their quiet residential street, satellite dishes sprouting from vehicles with license plates from 6 different states. Reporters approached neighbors for quotes, seeking any detail about the family's background, their religious practices, their financial situation. The threatening messages had started the second day. Anonymous emails questioning Dorothy's mental state, voicemails suggesting she was exploiting her grandson for attention, social media posts accusing the family of perpetrating fraud for financial gain. Most disturbing were the implications that Bobby's safety might be at risk if the hoax continued. "We should leave town for a while," David suggested during their family meeting. "Take Bobby somewhere he can just be a normal kid." "Running away won't solve anything," Dorothy replied. "Besides, I don't think this is something we can escape." Bobby seemed remarkably unaffected by the chaos surrounding him. He played with his toys, watched cartoons, and occasionally mentioned the pretty lady, with the casual matter-of-factness that children bring to extraordinary experiences. When reporters managed to approach him, despite his parents' protective efforts, he simply repeated what he'd told everyone. The lady had helped him when he couldn't get out of the water. Dr. Michael Stevens, a pediatric psychologist specializing in trauma, examined Bobby at the hospital's request. His evaluation found no signs of false memory implantation, no indication of coaching or suggestion from adults, no psychological markers associated with fabricated experiences. "The child is telling the truth as he experienced it," Dr. Stevens reported. "Whether that truth corresponds to objective reality is beyond my expertise to determine." The business community was dividing along predictable lines. Shop owners near the pool worried about lost revenue from the facility's closure, while others saw opportunity in the growing crowds of visitors. The Millfield Inn had bookings extending 3 months into the future, filled with journalists, religious tourists, and curiosity seekers. Father Antonio found himself caught between his pastoral duties and his academic training. The diocese had requested a full report on the incident, while theologians from 3 universities wanted access to the witnesses. His phone rang constantly with calls from religious media outlets seeking official church commentary on what many were calling a genuine miracle. The prayer group that met weekly at Dorothy's church had grown from 6 regular attendees to over 40, with newcomers driving from neighboring counties. They gathered Wednesday evening in the parish hall, their conversations mixing traditional devotions with excited discussion of contemporary miracles. "I've been Catholic my whole life," said Maria Santos, "but I never expected to see something like this with my own eyes." Others in the group were more cautious. "We need to be careful about letting emotions override good judgment," warned Frank Morrison, a retired engineer. "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence." The skeptical response was equally organized. The Regional Rationalist Society had dispatched investigators to examine the pool's security system, interview witnesses, and search for natural explanations. Their preliminary findings acknowledged the footage's authenticity, while arguing that unknown factors might account for what appeared miraculous. Dr. James Patterson, a professor of psychology at Penn State, published an open letter suggesting mass hysteria and confirmation bias. "When people desperately want to believe in miracles," he wrote, "they interpret ambiguous events through the lens of their expectations." But the ambiguity was precisely what troubled even the skeptics. The security footage was unambiguous in its documentation of events that seemed impossible. Enhanced frames showed the woman's face clearly, her robes undisturbed by water that should have soaked them instantly, her movements defying basic physics as she appeared and disappeared without explanation. Dorothy's adult children struggled with their own responses to the incident. Carol drove down from Philadelphia every weekend, seeking rational explanations while gradually accepting that none seemed forthcoming. Her brother Michael, a software engineer in Pittsburgh, had spent hours analyzing the video files, looking for digital signatures that might indicate manipulation. "I can't find anything wrong with the footage," he admitted during one family discussion, "but that doesn't mean I'm ready to believe in miracles." The pool facility itself had become an unofficial shrine. Despite being officially closed, people gathered at the fence surrounding the property, leaving flowers, prayer cards, and handwritten requests for intercession. The city council faced increasing pressure to reopen the pool, while simultaneously dealing with concerns about managing religious pilgrimage in a public facility. Bobby's kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Franklin, called Jessica to discuss the upcoming school year. "We need to prepare for media attention when Bobby starts classes," she explained. "The other children are going to have questions, and we want to handle this sensitively." The reality was settling in that Bobby's rescue had permanently altered their lives. Privacy was gone, normalcy was impossible, and every public appearance generated new speculation about their motivations, their mental health, and their credibility. Yet, Dorothy felt a strange peace amid the chaos. The prayer card that had traveled with her through decades of doubt now rested in a place of honor on her kitchen table, no longer hidden, but displayed as testimony to something larger than her understanding. The face that gazed up from the worn cardstock was the same face 36 cameras had recorded, saving her grandson's life. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she no longer carried the burden of wondering whether her prayers were heard. The answer had come with unmistakable clarity, captured in high definition for a world struggling to accept that some things transcend human explanation. The official letter arrived on Vatican letterhead, delivered by registered mail to Father Antonio's office 3 weeks after the incident. The familiar papal seal carried weight that transcended local authority, announcing that the Congregation for the Causes of Saints had opened a preliminary investigation into the reported miraculous intervention at Millfield's municipal pool. Monsignor Giuseppe Torretti, a specialist in claimed apparitions and miraculous healings, would arrive within the month to begin formal interviews with witnesses and examine the evidence. The letter emphasized the Church's commitment to thorough investigation, noting that authentic miracles required rigorous documentation and scientific analysis before any official recognition could be considered. Dorothy read the letter with trembling hands, realizing that Bobby's rescue had attracted attention from the highest levels of Catholic hierarchy. The weight of institutional scrutiny felt both validating and terrifying. Validation that the Church took their experience seriously, terror that her family would be subjected to intense examination by experts trained to distinguish genuine miracles from wishful thinking. The FBI's involvement came less ceremoniously, with Agent Rebecca Torres arriving unannounced at the pool facility to examine what had become a matter of national security interest. Not because anyone suspected terrorism, but because unexplained phenomena captured on government-monitored security systems triggered automatic protocols for investigation. "We're not here to validate or debunk anything," Agent Torres explained. To Mayor Davidson, "Our concern is whether this incident represents any threat to public safety or national security." Her team spent 2 days analyzing the camera equipment, interviewing technical personnel, and reviewing maintenance records for the security system. Their findings mirrored those of previous investigators. The footage was authentic, the equipment was functioning properly, and no evidence existed of technical malfunction or deliberate manipulation. Dr. Patricia Chen, a forensic psychiatrist from Johns Hopkins, interviewed Dorothy for 6 hours across 3 sessions. Her evaluation would form part of the Vatican's investigation, assessing the primary witness's mental state, credibility, and susceptibility to hallucination or false memory formation. "You've worked in healthcare for nearly 4 decades, Doctor," Chen observed. "You've presumably seen many situations where families hoped for miraculous intervention. How do you distinguish this experience from those hopes?" Dorothy considered the question carefully. "I've prayed for miracles many times, for my patients, for my own family. I've wanted desperately to believe that divine intervention was possible. But I've also seen enough suffering to know that wanting something doesn't make it real. And yet you're certain about what you witnessed." "As certain as I've ever been about anything." Dorothy pulled out her phone, displaying the security footage. "That had been shared with investigators. That's not my imagination or wishful thinking. That's my grandson being saved by someone who appeared and disappeared in ways that defy explanation." Bobby's behavior had begun to concern his parents in ways that both worried and amazed them. The 4-year-old spoke with increasing frequency about conversations with the pretty lady, describing detailed interactions that he claimed occurred during his sleep. He drew pictures of her daily, always depicting her in blue robes with her arms outstretched in blessing. "She says not to worry," Bobby told his mother one evening. "She says everything happens for reasons we don't understand yet." Jessica found herself writing down Bobby's statements, creating an informal record of what seemed like prophetic utterances from a child who'd never shown interest in religious concepts before his rescue. His vocabulary had expanded to include words he shouldn't know: intercession, blessing, divine love, spoken with the casual familiarity of someone much older. Local historian Margaret Hoffman made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the investigation. While researching the pool property's background for the town council, she'd uncovered references to previous unexplained events dating back to the area's earliest settlement records. In 1847, a cholera epidemic had threatened to destroy the small farming community. According to parish records maintained by the original Catholic mission, a woman in blue robes had appeared to several families, providing herbal remedies that cured the sick when medical treatment had failed. The descriptions matched the figure, captured on modern security cameras. Similar accounts surfaced from 1918 during the influenza pandemic and 1943, when a factory explosion had trapped workers underground. Each incident involved a mysterious woman whose intervention had saved lives in ways that local authorities couldn't explain. "The historical pattern is unmistakable," Margaret reported to the town council. "Every few generations during times of crisis or danger, witnesses report the same figure providing assistance that defies conventional explanation." Dr. Stephen Martinez, a physicist from the University of Pennsylvania, had volunteered to analyze the security footage using advanced motion analysis software. His frame-by-frame examination revealed anomalies that challenged basic understanding of physical laws. "The woman's movement through water shows no resistance patterns," he explained to the gathered investigators. "Water displacement should be visible, but the liquid around her behaves as if she has no mass." Additionally, her robes remained completely dry despite full immersion. The most disturbing finding involved temporal analysis of the footage. Multiple camera angles recorded the rescue, but their timestamps showed microsecond variations that suggested time distortion during the incident. Equipment that had maintained perfect synchronization before and after the event showed brief discrepancies during the 47 seconds of the woman's presence. National media attention had transformed Millfield into a pilgrimage destination. Religious tour buses arrived daily, their passengers seeking healing, blessing, or simply the chance to witness the place where modern miracle had occurred. The economic impact was substantial. Hotels booked solid, restaurants extending hours, gift shops selling religious items and replica prayer cards. But the attention brought complications. Protesters from atheist organizations demonstrated outside the pool facility, carrying signs demanding scientific skepticism and rational thinking. Counter-protesters responded with prayer vigils and hymn singing, creating tense confrontations that required police intervention. Dorothy's mail had grown to include hundreds of letters weekly, testimonials from people claiming their own miracles. After praying to the Virgin Mary, requests for Bobby to visit sick relatives, and offers from religious organizations seeking exclusive rights to tell their story. The most difficult letters came from desperate families facing their own crises, begging Dorothy to intercede with the Virgin Mary on their behalf. She read each one with tears, remembering her own years of unanswered prayers and the loneliness of hoping for divine intervention that never seemed to come. "How do I respond to this?" she asked Father Antonio, holding a letter from a mother whose daughter was dying of leukemia. "How do I tell her that I don't have any special connection to miracles?" "Perhaps," the priest suggested gently, "the miracle isn't that you have special access to divine intervention. Perhaps the miracle is that sometimes grace breaks through in ways that remind us we're not alone." The investigation was expanding beyond anyone's expectations, involving experts from multiple fields and drawing attention from religious authorities worldwide. But at its center remained a simple truth that no amount of analysis could diminish. A 4-year-old boy had been saved by someone who appeared when he needed help most, and 36 cameras had recorded evidence of something that transcended ordinary understanding. Dorothy's nursing journal had traveled with her through 37 years of hospital corridors, its pages documenting cases that medical textbooks couldn't capture. She'd written about Mrs. Peterson, who died despite every prayer, Dorothy. could whisper during her final hours about little Michael Santos, whose leukemia had taken him despite his grandmother's novenas, about her own husband, Richard, whose cancer had progressed relentlessly despite the faith community's fervent intercessions. The journal represented her crisis of faith in stark black ink, page after page of answered prayers that seemed to echo back unanswered, of hope that had curdled into doubt over decades of witnessing suffering that divine intervention had apparently ignored. Monsignor Toretti found Dorothy reading the journal in her kitchen, the morning light illuminating pages she'd barely looked at since retirement. The Vatican investigator was a gentler man than she'd expected, his questions probing but compassionate, his manner suggesting someone who understood the weight of spiritual experiences. "You've carried a heavy burden," he observed, noting the careful documentation of her spiritual struggles. "Tell me about your relationship with faith before your grandson's rescue." Dorothy closed the journal carefully. "I became a nurse because I wanted to heal people. My mother always said it was a calling, that God needed people willing to care for the sick and dying. But after years of watching good people suffer despite our prayers, I began to wonder if anyone was really listening. Yet you continued to carry the prayer card, habit maybe, or hope that I couldn't quite abandon even when I wanted to." She touched the worn image that now rested permanently on her kitchen table. "I kept thinking that maybe I was missing something, that maybe prayers were answered in ways I couldn't recognize." The conversation was interrupted by Bobby's excited voice from the living room. "Grandma, the pretty lady is here." Dorothy and Monsignor Toretti rushed to find Bobby standing at the front window, pointing toward the street with obvious delight. They saw only the usual collection of news vans, curious visitors, and protesters who'd become part of their daily landscape. "Where do you see her?" Dorothy asked gently. "Right there by the big tree." Bobby pressed his face against the glass. "She's waving at us. Can't you see her?" The adults saw nothing unusual, but Bobby's certainty was absolute. He'd begun having these experiences regularly, seeing the Virgin Mary in places where others noticed nothing extraordinary. Dr. Stevens had examined him repeatedly, finding no signs of hallucination or psychological disturbance. David Jennings sat across from Father Antonio in the church office, his discomfort with the situation evident in every gesture. "I need you to understand, I'm not a religious man. I haven't been to Mass since my wedding. This whole thing makes me feel like I'm losing my mind." "What specifically troubles you?" Father Antonio asked. "My son is having conversations with someone I can't see, talking about things a 4-year-old shouldn't know. My mother-in-law has gone from doubting God to being some kind of spiritual celebrity. And I'm supposed to just accept that my family has been chosen for some divine purpose?" The priest leaned forward. "Perhaps the question isn't whether you've been chosen, but whether you're willing to be open to something larger than your understanding. That's easy for you to say. Your life hasn't been turned upside down by strangers camping in your yard, and reporters asking if you believe in miracles." Dr. Amanda Foster had continued Bobby's medical monitoring, documenting changes that puzzled her professional understanding. The boy's cellular regeneration rates were accelerated, his immune responses enhanced, his cognitive development advancing at rates that suggested some form of biological optimization. "I can't publish these findings," she confided to her colleague, Dr. Walsh. "They suggest that whatever happened to this child has improved his physical condition in ways that medical science cannot explain." "Improved how?" "Enhanced healing, improved neural connectivity, optimized metabolic function. It's as if his entire biological system has been fine-tuned for peak performance." The Vatican investigators' interviews revealed a pattern that troubled and amazed him. Every witness to the pool incident had experienced some form of spiritual transformation. Jennifer Banks, the lifeguard, had converted to Catholicism after years of casual agnosticism. The pool manager had begun attending daily Mass. Even skeptical, Observers reported profound spiritual experiences in the weeks following the rescue. Dorothy's estranged sister Patricia called for the first time in 3 years, having seen the news coverage from her home in Oregon. Their conversation, stilted at first, gradually warmed as they discussed their shared childhood memories of their mother's unwavering faith. "Mama always said Mary watches over families," Patricia said softly. "I stopped believing that after Tommy died in Vietnam. But seeing what happened to Bobby, maybe Mama was right about some things." The healing between the sisters had begun with a phone call, but Dorothy sensed it ran deeper than coincidence. The miracle seemed to be creating ripples of reconciliation throughout her family and community, mending relationships that had been damaged by years of accumulated hurts. Local physician Dr. James Morrison had examined the security footage frame by frame, applying his 30 years of emergency medicine experience to Bobby's rescue. His findings, published in the local medical journal, acknowledged that the child's survival defied standard medical understanding. Cases of drowning with this duration of submersion typically result in significant neurological damage, he wrote. This child shows no adverse effects whatsoever, suggesting intervention that prevented the normal physiological consequences of oxygen deprivation. The anonymous threats against Dorothy's family had escalated, requiring police protection during public appearances. Someone had spray-painted "fake" across their garage door, and suspicious packages had been delivered to their home address. The hatred seemed to intensify in direct proportion to the evidence supporting the miraculous nature of Bobby's rescue. But support also grew stronger. Catholics from across the region had organized prayer vigils outside their home, creating a protective circle of believers who maintained constant presence. The contrast between the hostile skeptics and devoted faithful had begun to define the community's response to the miracle. Dorothy found herself becoming an informal spiritual counselor to visitors seeking guidance about their own faith struggles. People drove hundreds of miles to share their stories with the woman who'd witnessed the Virgin Mary's intervention, seeking comfort for their own unanswered prayers. "I don't have any special wisdom," she told a grieving mother who'd lost her teenage son in a car accident, "but I've learned that sometimes grace comes in ways we don't expect, and sometimes we have to trust that our suffering has meaning even when we can't see it." The journal that had documented her spiritual crisis now recorded a different kind of testimony. Page by page, she was writing about faith restored, about hope renewed, about a community transformed by the possibility that heaven still touched earth in moments of desperate need. Bobby continued to thrive, his development accelerating in ways that amazed his teachers and doctors. But more importantly, his presence seemed to radiate a peace that calmed tensions wherever he went. Protesters lowered their voices in his presence, skeptics found their arguments softening, and believers felt their faith strengthened simply by being near him. The miracle at the pool had become something larger than a single rescue. It was becoming a catalyst for spiritual renewal in a community that had forgotten how to hope for the impossible. The ancient church records lay spread across Margaret Hoffman's dining room table like pieces of a puzzle that had taken centuries to assemble. As Millfield's volunteer historian, she'd spent weeks digging through basement archives, dusty storage, rooms, and forgotten filing cabinets in her quest to understand the historical context of Bobby's rescue. What she'd discovered changed everything. The documents dated back to 1847, when Millfield was nothing more than a collection of farms surrounding a small Catholic mission. Father Patrick O'Brien's careful handwriting documented the first recorded appearance of a woman in blue robes during the cholera epidemic that had threatened to destroy the settlement. September 15th, 1847, Margaret read aloud to Dorothy and Monsignor Toretti. A woman of extraordinary beauty appeared to the Kowalski family as their youngest child lay dying of the fever. She blessed the child with water from the creek, and he recovered completely. When questioned, She spoke no words, but smiled with infinite compassion before vanishing as mysteriously as she had come. The pattern continued through generations. Every 30 to 40 years, during times of crisis that threatened the community's survival, witnesses reported the same figure. The descriptions remained remarkably consistent across 175 years of documentation. Blue robes, dark hair, an expression of loving sorrow, and an ability to appear and disappear without explanation. 21. During a diphtheria outbreak that claimed 12 children, she appeared to the Henderson family, saving their twin daughters when medical treatment had failed. 18. As the Spanish flu devastated the town, she was seen at the bedside of the elderly, the sick, and the dying, always bringing healing that physicians couldn't explain. 43. When an explosion at the munitions factory trapped 17 workers underground, she guided rescue efforts to find survivors in sections of the mine that human searchers had declared unreachable. 1962. The year the public pool was built, she appeared to a drowning child whose rescue had been deemed impossible by emergency responders. "My God," Dorothy whispered, studying photocopies of century-old testimonials. "It's the same woman, exactly the same." Monsignor Toretti examined the documents with the practiced eye of someone who'd investigated claimed apparitions across 6 continents. The consistency of the accounts, separated by decades and documented by different witnesses with no apparent communication between them, suggested something far more significant than coincidence or mass hysteria. "There's more," Margaret said, opening a leather-bound journal that bore Dorothy's maiden name on the cover. "This belonged to your great-great-grandmother, Catherine Brennan." Dorothy's hands trembled as she opened the journal to pages dated 1918. The handwriting was elegant but hurried, documenting the Spanish flu pandemic that had claimed nearly a quarter of the town's population. October 12th, 1918. "She came to us during little Mary's fever crisis. I was certain we would lose our daughter, as we had lost so many others. But the woman in blue touched Mary's forehead, and the fever broke instantly. I asked her name, but she only smiled and said, 'I am the mother of all children.' When I turned to fetch my husband, she was gone." The journal contained detailed sketches of the woman, the same face that Dorothy had carried on her prayer card, the same figure that security cameras had captured, saving Bobby's life. "Your family has witnessed her presence across 4 generations," Monsignor Toretti observed. "This transforms the context of your grandson's rescue from an isolated incident to part of a much larger pattern of divine intervention." Dr. Elizabeth Newman, a theologian from Georgetown University who specialized in Marian apparitions, had arrived to study the historical documentation. Her preliminary analysis suggested that Millfield might be what Catholic theology termed a favored place, a location where the spiritual realm intersected with the physical world in ways that transcended normal understanding. Authenticated. Apparition sites share certain characteristics, she explained to the growing group of investigators. They occur in places where communities face existential threats. They involve consistent visual appearances spanning multiple generations, and they result in measurable positive outcomes that suggest divine intervention. Bobby's prophetic statements had become more frequent and specific. He spoke about healing that would come to specific families, about conflicts that would be resolved, about changes that would transform the community. Most remarkably, his predictions were proving accurate with unsettling consistency. "The sad man will be happy again," he told Dorothy 3 days before Frank Morrison announced that his depression had lifted after months of struggling with his wife's death. "The broken family will be together," he'd said before Patricia called, to announce she was coming home to rebuild her relationship with Dorothy. "People will stop being angry at each other," he'd predicted before the first joint prayer service brought together Catholic, Protestant, and Jewish congregations in unprecedented unity. The Vatican investigator was documenting everything, recognizing that he might be witnessing the early stages of what could become an officially recognized apparition site. The evidence was overwhelming: historical consistency, miraculous healings, prophetic accuracy, and physical evidence that defied scientific explanation. But the discovery that troubled everyone was Bobby's latest drawing. Unlike his previous pictures of the woman in blue, this one showed her surrounded by people from different backgrounds and faiths, all kneeling together in prayer. Above them, dark clouds were breaking apart to reveal brilliant light. She says, "Something big is coming," Bobby explained matter-of-factly, "something that will make everyone understand." The opposition to the claimed miracle had organized into a formal campaign called the Millfield Truth Initiative, led by Dr. Richard Hawkins, a prominent skeptic who'd made a career of debunking religious claims. He'd scheduled a public confrontation for the following week, a town hall meeting where he planned to present evidence that the Jennings family had orchestrated an elaborate hoax for financial gain. The announcement had divided the community more sharply than ever. Supporters of Dorothy and the miraculous interpretation rallied to defend what they saw as genuine divine intervention. Skeptics welcomed the opportunity for rational analysis of claims they considered dangerous delusions. Dorothy felt the weight of the historical revelation settling around her like a mantle she hadn't asked to wear. Her family had been witnesses to divine intervention for over a century, yet she'd spent decades doubting whether God heard prayers at all. The irony was overwhelming. She'd carried evidence of answered prayers in her own bloodline while believing herself abandoned by heaven. "Why our family?" she asked Monsignor Toretti during one of their late evening conversations. "Why us across all these generations?" "Perhaps," he suggested gently, "because your family has consistently been present where help was needed most. Your great-great-grandmother was a midwife. Your grandmother was a teacher. You spent your career caring for the sick. Maybe divine intervention comes through those who dedicate their lives to serving others." The ancient records revealed one more crucial detail that sent chills through everyone who read it. Each documented apparition had been followed by a period of community renewal, economic recovery, spiritual revival, and social healing that lasted for decades. The pattern suggested that Bobby's rescue was not an ending, but a beginning. Father O'Brien's final entry about the 1847 apparition proved most prophetic. The woman's presence has transformed our community in ways that extend far beyond the immediate miracle. Neighbors who had been divided by old country rivalries now work together. Families who had lost faith have returned to prayer. The very character of our settlement has been purified by grace. The same transformation was already visible in modern Millfield. Crime rates had dropped to historic lows. Divorce filings had decreased by 60%. Charitable giving had increased dramatically, and volunteer organizations reported unprecedented participation. But most significantly, the various religious congregations had begun working together in ways that would have been unimaginable before. Bobby's rescue. The Methodist Church was sharing facilities with the growing Catholic prayer groups. The Jewish Community Center had opened its doors for interfaith discussions. Even non-religious residents found themselves drawn to spiritual conversations that had been absent from public discourse for years. Dr. Hawkins' investigation had uncovered financial records, analyzed the pool's security system, and interviewed dozens of witnesses. His preliminary findings, leaked to sympathetic media outlets, claimed to have identified inconsistencies in witness testimony and possible motives for fabricating the miracle. This family has received over $50,000 in donations from religious supporters, he announced at a press conference. They've signed a book deal and are negotiating movie rights. The financial incentives for maintaining this charade are substantial. Dorothy watched the press conference from her living room, feeling the familiar weight of doubt creeping back into her thoughts. The money had come unsolicited. Donations from believers who wanted to support Bobby's family. The book deal had been proposed by publishers, not sought by them, but she understood how these facts could be twisted to suggest mercenary motives. "Maybe we should give the money back," Jessica suggested during their family meeting. "Maybe we should refuse all the offers and just try to return to normal." "There is no normal anymore," Dorothy replied, looking at Bobby, who was quietly drawing another picture of the woman in blue. "And I don't think we're supposed to go back to the way things were." Bobby looked up from his artwork. "The pretty lady says not to worry about the angry people. She says they're just scared because they don't understand yet." He returned to his drawing, adding details that seemed impossibly sophisticated for a 4-year-old's motor skills. The latest picture showed the woman standing not just at the pool, but in a town square where people of all ages and backgrounds were gathering together. "When will this happen?" Dorothy asked gently. "Soon," Bobby replied without looking up. "When everyone stops fighting and starts listening." The town hall meeting was scheduled for the following Friday evening. Dr. Hawkins would present his evidence challenging the miracle's authenticity. Dorothy had been invited to respond, to defend her family's experience against accusations of fraud and delusion. As she prepared for what felt like a trial of her faith, Dorothy realized that the historical records had revealed something more profound than evidence of past miracles. They had shown her that divine intervention wasn't a one-time event, but an ongoing presence, appearing whenever communities faced their darkest moments and needed hope most desperately. The question now was whether Millfield was ready to accept that it had been chosen for something larger than any of them had imagined, not just as the site of a modern miracle, but as a beacon of faith for a world that had forgotten how to believe in the impossible. The protest permit documents lay on Mayor Davidson's desk like a declaration of war. Dr. Hawkins's Millfield Truth Initiative had filed for permission to demonstrate outside the town hall during Friday evening's public meeting, expecting to draw supporters from 3 states. Counter-permits had been filed by religious organizations planning their own demonstrations of faith and support for Dorothy's testimony. "We're looking at potentially 500 people on each side," Police Chief Williams reported during the emergency planning session. "That's more than our entire force can handle if things turn ugly." The town hall's capacity was limited to 300, but advance registration had reached nearly 2,000. National media outlets had reserved blocks of seats, while religious broadcasters planned live coverage of what many were calling the trial of a modern miracle. Dorothy sat in her kitchen at 5 in the morning, staring at the notes she'd prepared for her testimony. How do you defend the impossible? How do you prove that what everyone saw actually happened when the very people who witnessed it were being accused of delusion or conspiracy? Her health had deteriorated under the mounting pressure. The stress of constant scrutiny, combined with her age and the emotional weight of becoming an unwilling spokesperson for divine intervention, had left her visibly frail. Dr. Foster had privately expressed concern about her ability to withstand the rigors of a public confrontation. "Mom, you don't have to do this," Jessica said, finding her mother hunched over her notes in the pre-dawn darkness. "You don't owe anyone an explanation for what you saw." "Yes, I do," Dorothy replied softly. "If I don't speak up for what happened, who will? If I let fear silence me, what does that say about faith?" Bobby had been experiencing his most vivid visions yet. He'd awakened 3 nights running with detailed descriptions of the town hall meeting, describing scenes that hadn't yet occurred, but felt prophetically certain. His drawings from these visions showed Dorothy speaking to a crowd that initially appeared hostile but gradually transformed into something resembling unity. "The angry people will cry," he'd told his parents, "but they'll be happy tears, not sad ones." Father Antonio had spent the week in prayer and preparation, sensing that Friday's meeting would determine not just Dorothy's credibility, but the spiritual future of their entire community. The diocese had sent additional priests to help manage the crowds, while providing guidance on how to maintain dignity and faith in the face of aggressive skepticism. The Vatican investigator had accelerated his timeline, recognizing that the public confrontation could either validate or permanently damage the case for authentic, miraculous intervention. Monsignor Toretti worked late into each night, documenting witness testimonies and historical evidence that could support Dorothy's testimony. Dr. Hawkins had marshaled impressive resources for his presentation: video analysis experts, psychological profilers, financial investigators, and technology specialists would present evidence designed to demolish the miracle claim once and for all. His advance publicity promised definitive proof that the Jennings family had orchestrated an elaborate deception. The opposing camps had been preparing as if for battle. Religious supporters organized prayer chains that operated around the clock, seeking divine guidance for the confrontation ahead. Skeptical organizations coordinated their attendance through social media, planning to challenge every aspect of Dorothy's testimony with scientific rigor. Local businesses found themselves choosing sides in ways that reflected the community's deeper divisions. The Millfield Inn displayed a sign supporting truth and rational thinking, while Murphy's Diner posted messages of faith and support for Dorothy's family. Even choosing where to eat lunch had become a statement of belief or disbelief. Dorothy's extended family had rallied around her with surprising unity. Patricia had flown in from Oregon. Siblings who hadn't spoken in years were coordinating support, and cousins from across the country were making travel arrangements to attend the meeting. The family that had been scattered by time and distance was reuniting around the miraculous rescue of its youngest member. The anonymous threats had escalated throughout the week. Someone had thrown rocks through the Jennings front windows, requiring the installation of protective plywood that turned their home into a fortress. Death threats arrived daily through email and social media, while supporters sent flowers and prayer cards in equal measure. Bobby seemed remarkably unaffected by the chaos surrounding him. He continued his normal 4-year-old activities, playing with toys, watching cartoons, and creating art with the focused intensity that had characterized his work since the pool incident. But his latest drawings had taken on an almost architectural precision, depicting the town hall's interior with details he shouldn't have been able to know. "How does he know what the inside of the building looks like?" David asked Jessica. "We've never taken him there." The drawings showed not just the physical layout, but the emotional geography of Friday's meeting, where supporters would sit, where skeptics would gather, where Dorothy would stand to deliver her testimony. Most unsettling was his depiction of Dr. Hawkins, drawn with tears streaming down his face, despite having never met the man. Dr. Foster had conducted a final medical evaluation of Bobby, documenting his continued exceptional health while noting the spiritual maturity that seemed to accelerate daily. His vocabulary now included theological concepts that graduate students struggled to understand, yet he used them with the natural ease of someone much older. "I want to be there Friday night," Bobby announced during dinner on Tuesday. "The pretty lady says I need to help Grandma." "Absolutely not," Jessica replied immediately. "You're too young for something like this." "But she says it's important. She says people need to see that I'm okay." The debate over Bobby's attendance had divided the family. Dorothy felt his presence might provide powerful testimony to his complete recovery, while his parents worried about exposing him to a potentially hostile crowd. The compromise solution involved keeping him nearby but out of the main auditorium. Unless circumstances required his appearance, media attention had reached international levels. British newspapers were running front-page stories about America's modern miracle, while Vatican radio had scheduled special coverage of the proceedings. The small town of Millfield found itself at the center of a global conversation about faith, evidence, and the possibility of divine intervention in the modern world. Thursday evening brought the most ominous development yet. Dorothy collapsed during dinner, her blood pressure spiking to dangerous levels under the accumulated stress of the approaching confrontation. The emergency room visit lasted 4 hours, with doctors expressing serious concern about her ability to withstand the rigors of public testimony. Mrs. Castellano, you're experiencing stress-related cardiac symptoms, Dr. Foster explained. I strongly recommend postponing tomorrow's meeting until your health stabilizes. I can't postpone it, Dorothy replied from her hospital bed. If I don't speak tomorrow, people will assume I'm backing down because I can't defend the truth. As Thursday night turned to Friday morning, supporters began gathering outside the town hall for an all-night prayer vigil. Their voices carried hymns through the darkness, creating a constant reminder that faith and skepticism were about to collide in ways that would determine Millfield's spiritual future. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test not just Dorothy's credibility, but the community's capacity to accept that some truths transcend human understanding. In less than 18 hours, a 72-year-old grandmother would stand before hundreds of people and defend the impossible against those who demanded rational explanations for what 36 cameras had recorded, but no one could fully explain. The town hall microphone stood like a sentinel in the center of the stage, its simple black mesh promising to amplify whatever truth Dorothy could summon from her exhausted spirit. She sat in the front row, her hands folded in her lap, watching as 300 people filed into seats that seemed divided by an invisible line between believers and skeptics. Dr. Hawkins commanded the left side of the auditorium, his supporters, carrying clipboards and recording devices, their faces set with the grim determination of people about to expose a fraud. The right side filled with families from local churches, many clutching rosaries and prayer cards, their expressions radiating the hope that their faith would be validated before the watching world. Mayor Davidson took the podium at 7 o'clock, sharp, his nervousness evident as he outlined the evening's format. Dr. Hawkins would present his evidence first, followed by Dorothy's response, then questions from the audience. Police officers stationed throughout the auditorium maintained watchful alertness for the first signs of trouble. Ladies and gentlemen, the mayor began, we're here tonight to address questions about the incident at our municipal pool 6 weeks ago. This is not a trial, but a community discussion about events that have brought national attention to our town. Dr. Hawkins approached the microphone with the confidence of someone who'd spent his career dismantling religious claims. His presentation began with financial documents displayed on large screens, showing the donations and media offers that had come to Dorothy's family since Bobby's rescue. Ladies and gentlemen of Millfield, he began, his voice carrying the authority of academic credentials and media experience. We are here to examine claims that defy natural law, supported by evidence that crumbles under scientific scrutiny. He methodically presented his case. Inconsistencies in witness testimony, financial motives for maintaining the miracle story, and technological explanations for what appeared impossible on the security footage. His team had identified camera angles that could create optical illusions, lighting conditions that might distort perception, and psychological factors that could lead to mass hysteria. The human mind desperately wants to believe in miracles. Dr. Hawkins continued, his presentation slides showing brain scans and psychological studies. When faced with traumatic events, especially involving children, people will interpret ambiguous stimuli through the lens of their deepest hopes and fears. Dorothy listened to her family's experience being dissected and dismissed, feeling each argument like a physical blow. The financial documents were accurate. Money had come from supporters, but the implication that they'd staged Bobby's rescue for profit felt like a violation of everything sacred about that afternoon. The technical analysis was impressive, suggesting that multiple camera malfunctions could have created the appearance of supernatural intervention. Computer models demonstrated how lighting anomalies and digital compression artifacts might generate images that seemed to show a figure that wasn't actually present. Furthermore, Dr. Hawkins announced, "We have documented evidence that Mrs. Castellano has a history of psychological instability, including treatment for depression following her husband's death and documented struggles with faith-related anxiety." Dorothy felt the audience's attention focus on her like a spotlight. Her medical privacy had been violated, her private struggles with grief and faith exposed to public judgment. The whispers from the skeptical side of the auditorium carried words like delusional and attention-seeking. When Dr. Hawkins finished his 40-minute presentation, the applause from his supporters was enthusiastic and sustained. He'd constructed a convincing case that reduced Bobby's rescue to a combination of coincidence, technical malfunction, and psychological delusion amplified by religious wishful thinking. Dorothy approached the microphone on unsteady legs, her heart racing dangerously as she faced the crowd that would determine whether her family's experience was accepted as genuine or dismissed as fraud. The simple black device that would carry her voice to the world suddenly seemed impossibly heavy. "My name is Dorothy Castellano," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "6 weeks ago, I watched my 4-year-old grandson drown in 3 feet of water. I also watched someone save his life in a way that I cannot explain, but will never forget." She spoke about her nursing career, her struggles with faith, her years of unanswered prayers in hospital corridors. She described the afternoon at the pool, the moment of recognition when she saw the face from her prayer card, the overwhelming sense of grace that had transformed her understanding of divine intervention. "Dr. Hawkins has shown you financial records and suggested that money motivated our story. Let me tell you what money can't buy: the peace in my grandson's eyes when he speaks about the woman who saved him, the healing in our community as people rediscover faith, the unity that's growing between neighbors who've been divided for years." The hostile questions came immediately. "How do you respond to evidence of camera malfunctions? Can you explain the inconsistencies in witness testimony? Why should we believe claims that contradict everything we know about physics?" Dorothy answered each challenge with quiet dignity, acknowledging that she couldn't provide scientific explanations for what had happened. "I'm not asking you to believe because of evidence," she said. "I'm asking you to consider whether some truths are larger than what science can measure." The tension in the auditorium was reaching a breaking point when Bobby's small voice cut through the adult arguments. "Grandma, can I help?" He'd entered the back of the auditorium with his parents, his presence immediately shifting the room's emotional energy. Dorothy saw the change in people's faces as they looked at the child whose rescue had created this controversy, healthy, alert, radiating an inexplicable sense of peace. "Tell them about the pretty lady," Bobby said, walking down the center aisle. With the fearless confidence that only children possess, Dorothy knelt to Bobby's height as he reached the stage. "What should I tell them?" "Tell them she's still here," he said, pointing toward empty space near the microphone. "Tell them she wants everyone to stop being mad at each other." The auditorium fell silent as Bobby spoke with the clear conviction of someone stating obvious truth. "She says some people need to see things to believe, but believing helps you see things better." Dr. Hawkins stepped toward the microphone, perhaps to challenge a 4-year-old's testimony, but stopped as Bobby looked directly at him. "She says you're not really angry," Bobby told him. "You're just scared that everything you learned might be wrong." For the first time all evening, Dr. Hawkins seemed to have no response. He stared at Bobby with an expression that mixed confusion, discomfort, and something that might have been recognition. Then Dorothy collapsed. The hospital rosary had belonged to Dorothy's mother, its worn wooden beads smooth from decades of faithful fingers. Now it rested on the bedside table in the cardiac care unit, becoming a focal point for the unlikely vigil that had formed around Dorothy's room. Dr. Hawkins sat in the chair closest to her bed, his confident demeanor replaced by something approaching anguish. The man who'd spent the evening systematically dismantling claims of miraculous intervention now found himself praying to a God he'd spent his career arguing didn't exist. "I don't understand what's happening to me," he confided to Father Antonio, who'd arrived within minutes of Dorothy's collapse. "I came here to expose fraud, and now I'm begging for a miracle." The transformation had begun the moment Bobby spoke, to him directly. Something in the child's eyes, a depth of understanding that seemed impossible in someone so young, had shattered Dr. Hawkins' certainty about the nature of reality. When Dorothy collapsed immediately afterward, he'd been the first person to reach her side. Bobby led the prayer circle that had formed spontaneously in the hospital waiting room. Children and adults, believers and former skeptics, Catholic and Protestant and Jewish voices united in the simple request that Dorothy be allowed to recover. The rosary passed from hand to hand, its rhythm creating a meditation that transcended denominational differences. "Hail Mary, full of grace," the voices whispered together, the words carrying weight they'd never held before. This wasn't rote recitation, but desperate plea. Community prayer focused on a woman who'd become the bridge between doubt and faith for an entire town. Dr. Foster emerged from Dorothy's room every hour with updates that defied medical explanation. The cardiac crisis that should have required emergency intervention was resolving on its own. Her vital signs were stabilizing without medication, her heart rhythm returning to normal patterns that suggested healing rather than merely management. "I can't account for this recovery," she admitted to the assembled family. Her condition was critical when she arrived, but every indicator shows remarkable improvement. Bobby had been drawing throughout the vigil, his latest artwork showing Dorothy surrounded by light, while people of all backgrounds knelt in prayer. But this picture included details that troubled the adults. It showed the hospital room exactly as it appeared, though Bobby had never been inside. "How did you know what Grandma's room looks like?" Jessica asked gently. "The pretty lady showed me," Bobby replied matter-of-factly. "She says Grandma is going to be okay because everyone finally stopped fighting and started praying together." The vigil had indeed brought together people who'd been divided by the miracle controversy. Dr. Hawkins knelt beside Maria Santos, the grandmother who'd been with Dorothy during Bobby's rescue. Former protesters prayed alongside devoted believers, their differences dissolved in shared concern for a woman who'd suffered for her willingness to testify about the impossible. Father Antonio moved through the waiting room, offering comfort to anyone who needed it, regardless of their faith background or previous position on Dorothy's claims. The priest who'd spent weeks carefully investigating miraculous claims now witnessed a different kind of miracle, the transformation of human hearts through shared vulnerability. "Something changed tonight," he observed to Monsignor Toretti. "I've seen communities divided by claimed miracles, but I've never seen skeptics become believers so completely." The Vatican investigator nodded, recognizing that he was documenting not just Dorothy's healing, but the spiritual awakening of an entire community. His reports would note that authentic miracles often catalyzed transformations that extended far beyond the original supernatural event. At 3 a.m, Dorothy's eyes opened to find her room filled with people she'd never expected to see together. Dr. Hawkins sat beside former protesters who'd driven from 3 states to challenge her testimony. Religious supporters shared coffee with academic skeptics who'd come to debunk her claims. "What happened?" she whispered, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "A miracle," Dr. Hawkins said softly, tears streaming down his face. "Not a kind I came here to disprove, but the kind I never knew I needed." He explained how Bobby's simple words had shattered his certainty about the nature of reality, how Dorothy's collapse had forced him to confront the emptiness of his aggressive skepticism, how the community's united prayer had revealed the spiritual hunger he'd spent years denying. "I've built my career on rational thinking," he admitted, "but rationality without room for wonder is just another form of blindness." Dorothy reached for the rosary on her bedside table, feeling its familiar weight as evidence of prayers that had indeed been answered. Not just prayers for healing, but prayers for understanding, for unity, for the kind of faith that could transform communities. Bobby entered the room with his parents, carrying his latest drawing, a picture of the entire town gathered around the pool where his rescue had occurred. But in this image, the water glowed with the same light witnesses had described during his rescue, and people of all backgrounds stood together in reverent recognition. "Is this what's going to happen?" Dorothy asked gently. "It already is happening," Bobby replied, pointing to the diverse group gathered in her hospital room. "The pretty lady says when people stop being afraid of believing, they start being able to see." Dr. Foster's final medical evaluation found Dorothy's recovery medically inexplicable. The cardiac crisis that had threatened her life had resolved completely, leaving her in better health than she'd enjoyed in years. Her blood pressure was normal, her heart rhythm strong, her energy restored. "We have no medical explanation for this recovery," Dr. Foster announced to the gathered crowd. "But given everything that's happened in Millfield over the past 6 weeks, perhaps medical explanations aren't always necessary." The hospital staff had been documenting their own transformation throughout the vigil. Nurses who'd approached their work as purely scientific found themselves praying with patients' families. Doctors who'd dismissed religious faith as superstition discovered comfort in spiritual practices they'd previously ignored. As dawn broke over Millfield, Dorothy prepared to leave the hospital surrounded by people who'd entered the evening as adversaries, but were leaving as something approaching family. The controversy that had divided their community had become the catalyst for unprecedented unity. Dr. Hawkins helped Dorothy to the wheelchair, his scientific credentials now balanced by humility about the limits of human understanding. "I came here to prove you wrong," he said quietly. "Instead, you taught me that being wrong about some things means being open to truths I'd never imagined." The transformation was complete, captured in a single image that would become iconic. Dorothy holding Bobby's hand as they left the hospital, surrounded by believers and former skeptics, united in recognition that they'd witnessed something that transcended human explanation. 6 months after Bobby's rescue, the memorial plaque beside Millfield's public pool gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, its bronze surface reflecting the faces of children who played in water that had witnessed the impossible. The inscription was simple: "In recognition of divine grace, witnessed here July 15th, 2025, and in gratitude for the healing that follows." Dorothy sat in her familiar chair at the pool's edge, no longer the reluctant witness to a miracle, but a gentle counselor to the steady stream of pilgrims who sought her guidance. The woman who'd spent decades questioning whether prayers were heard had become living testimony that grace breaks through in ways that transform not just individuals, but entire communities. The pool had reopened under new management that balanced respect for its spiritual significance with practical needs of a municipal facility. Visitors came from around the world, but they came quietly, reverently, understanding that sacred ground required sacred behavior. The healing water that Bobby had described now served children whose laughter carried new meaning for everyone who remembered that July afternoon. Bobby, now 5 and starting kindergarten, showed no awareness that his rescue had changed thousands of lives. He played in the same shallow water where the Virgin Mary had lifted him to safety, his presence a constant reminder that miracles leave their recipients remarkably normal despite the extraordinary circumstances of their salvation. But normal for Bobby included conversations with the pretty lady that continued to provide guidance for challenges facing their community. When the town council struggled with budget decisions, Bobby would relay messages about priorities and solutions. When families faced crises, he would offer comfort with wisdom that seemed channeled from sources beyond his years. Dr. Hawkins had become Dorothy's most unlikely ally. his transformation from aggressive skeptic to humble believer, providing powerful testimony to the miracle's authenticity. He'd written a book about his experience called The Limits of Disbelief, which had become required reading in theology programs and scientific ethics courses. "I spent my career demanding physical evidence for spiritual claims," he wrote in the book's conclusion. "What I learned in Millfield is that some evidence transcends the physical, touching places in human consciousness that scientific instruments cannot measure." The Vatican investigation had concluded with unprecedented speed, Monsignor Toretti's report recommending full recognition of the Millfield apparition. The historical documentation, combined with contemporary evidence and ongoing miraculous healings, met every criterion for authentic divine intervention. Pope Francis himself had issued a statement acknowledging the profound spiritual transformation witnessed in this Pennsylvania community, where ancient faith has found new expression through the tender mercy of our Blessed Mother. The economic transformation had exceeded everyone's expectations. Religious tourism brought thoughtful visitors who spent money respectfully, supporting local businesses while maintaining the dignity appropriate to a sacred site. The Millfield Inn had expanded to accommodate pilgrims, while restaurants offered menus that reflected the international character of their guests. But the spiritual transformation ran deeper than economics. Crime rates had dropped to virtually zero. Divorce proceedings had decreased by 75%. Volunteer organizations reported waiting lists of people eager to serve their community. The same pool that had witnessed Bobby's rescue had become the symbol of a town renewed through grace. Dorothy's adult children had all returned to active faith practice, their mother's experience providing the catalyst for spiritual renewal they'd resisted for decades. Carol drove down from Philadelphia every weekend, bringing her teenage children to the place where their great-grandmother had learned to trust again. "You saved more than Bobby that day," Carol told her mother during one of their poolside conversations. "You saved our whole family's relationship with God." The interfaith cooperation that began during Dorothy's hospital vigil had become permanent. Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, and even non-religious residents worked together on community projects with unprecedented harmony. The miracle had somehow dissolved barriers that had divided Millfield for generations. Bobby's drawings had evolved into sophisticated artwork that theologians studied for insights into mystical experience. His latest series depicted scenes from around the world where the Virgin Mary was providing comfort to suffering people, images he couldn't have seen, but rendered with photographic accuracy. "She's everywhere," he explained to visitors who asked about his art. "People just don't always know how to look for her." The threatening messages had stopped completely after Dr. Hawkins' conversion became public. Former opponents found it impossible to maintain hostility toward a family whose experience had created such obviously positive outcomes. Even the most committed skeptics acknowledged that something beneficial had happened in Millfield, regardless of their beliefs about its supernatural origins. Dr. Foster continued Bobby's medical monitoring, documenting ongoing enhancements to his physical and cognitive development. His immune system functioned at optimal levels, his learning capacity accelerated beyond normal parameters, and his emotional maturity provided stability that calmed situations wherever he went. "This child represents something new in my medical experience," she wrote in her research notes. "Whatever happened during his rescue appears to have optimized his biological systems in ways that suggest intervention beyond current scientific understanding." The pool's security cameras continued recording 24 hours daily, their footage archived by researchers hoping to document additional supernatural activity. While no subsequent apparitions had been captured, visitors reported mystical experiences with remarkable frequency, healings, spiritual insights, and profound peace that lingered long after they left Millfield. Dorothy's prayer card, now permanently displayed in a place of honor on her kitchen table, had become the model for thousands of replicas distributed to pilgrims. But she knew that the real miracle wasn't captured in any image. It was the ongoing transformation of hearts that had forgotten how to hope. As afternoon faded toward evening, Dorothy watched new families arrive at the pool, their children eager to play in water that carried stories of grace. She recognized the same protective anxiety in these parents that she'd felt with Bobby, the constant awareness that danger could strike without warning. But she also recognized something else, the quiet confidence that comes from knowing that even in the darkest moments, help might appear from sources beyond human understanding. The miracle at Millfield's pool had proven that divine intervention hadn't ended with ancient stories, that grace still broke through for those whose need was greatest. Bobby splashed in the shallow water with his friends, occasionally waving at his grandmother with the unconscious joy of a child who'd never doubted that he was surrounded by love. The late afternoon light caught the water around him, creating patterns that reminded Dorothy of that July day when the impossible had become undeniably real. The woman in blue robes might not be visible to everyone, but her presence had become part of Millfield's daily reality. In the kindness between neighbors, in the healing of old wounds, in the quiet faith that sustained a community through ordinary challenges and extraordinary grace. As the sun set behind the pool where everything had changed, Dorothy whispered the prayer her mother had taught her 70 years ago, no longer wondering if anyone was listening, but grateful beyond words that the answer had come in time to save not just her grandson, but the faith of an entire community that had forgotten how to believe in miracles.